Is it on? It's mic check, testing 1, 2. Can we have that up a bit, please? Shit.
So my name is Keiichi Matsuda. I'm a designer and filmmaker. I'm the president here. But my background, I'm not a programmer. My background's in architecture. So I studied my bachelor's and master's here in London. But I really felt during my course that I was quite kind of frustrated with the discipline of architecture, that people sort of refused or were not interested in engaging with this much more interesting conversation about data and networks and the internet. And I feel really that technology and data are the things that are driving the world at the moment. And you know, as a designer of any form, you should be interested in these things. Yeah. So how are we going to deal with the influx of data that we're going to be generating? Well, we're going to need some new tools and new methods to understand this resource, because it could be a very good thing that we have this, or it could also be a harmful thing as well. So my work is kind of situated in the intersection of media, technology and urbanism. And I'm trying to focus on the impact of everyday life from emerging technologies. So I'm going to show you some of my projects which propose ideas on how data could be integrated into our lives and what our future may look like, essentially. So this is the first project that I'm going to show you. It's called Augmented Hyperreality, and it's based on augmented reality, as the title suggests. I produced this a couple of years ago during my master's, and it's basically a series of films, plus a lot of drawings and nozzle work pieces. But I'll just show you the films for now, they're very short.
乗馬フィットネスマシンロデオボーイズーモンで
新製品は前後左右の動きに上下振り運
Cup of tea. Fill kettle with 2 hot place 1 PG tips tea bag in a clean mug. Now get the skim milk from the refrigerator. Carefully pour boiling water into the mug. You're doing great. While you're waiting for the tea to brew, why not browse some recipe suggestions to help you decide on a dinner that will satisfy your preferences.
早くなった。すごい。
I made that video because I wanted to try and think about architecture not in the way of making buildings, but in treating kind of space as a form of media, to be able to break out of the limitations that conventional architecture imposes on us and look at kind of pure spatial design. So that led me to think about how can you then start to represent data and what advantages do you get by having 3 dimensions. And one of those is in the film is this is kind of like a social media module in a way. So you have kind of all of your friends and connections, and you're able to map certain things to certain axes, right? So in this example, time is mapped to the z-axis, so that as things move away from you, they get older. New updates appear in front of you, and you can also arrange your contacts around in physical space as well. So you can put like your family over here, and your friends over here, and your co-workers over here. And so I was looking at cockpits as a really useful precedent in thinking about how to map information into space, because it's not just about understanding your environment; it's also about how to control that as well. Cockpits are interesting because you group the most necessary and important controls right in front of you, and the other ones are around the space as well. And there are some back here that you know where they are, so you can just flick over and switch them when you need them. And this is like an interesting way of thinking about how to group kind of certain interactions and behaviours within physical space. So it led me to make another film. This one's in 3D.
How are you? You right? How was the trip?
So that bit at the end, like where you saw the guy standing on the station, and he has this kind of personality with him as well, like the whole kind of all of his choices and all of the things that he chooses to see. And the idea is that she would also have hers as well, and they would kind of merge together to form a unique sort of worldview that could only be accessed when there are two people, the same people looking at the same
It's all
time.
consenting and
It's
private, essentially.
Yeah, but I mean, part of this is that the augmented city is a bit like the internet. You can't experience the whole thing at the same time. You have to find a way to filter and aggregate that information. So the way you do that in the film is through this channel browser, which is a kind of module that allows you to switch on and switch off different areas of the city. So it was the idea that you could probably kind of subscribe to content in the same way that you aggregate through an RSS feed or something like that. And it would mean that the city that you see, the city experience, becomes a real sort of reflection of your own personality and your own sort of likes and dislikes. There's kind of a branch of Zen philosophy that talks about the idea of projecting yourself onto the world, and this is really what's happening here. That you're kind of all of your tastes and all of your ideas are kind of projected onto your environment, which obviously has lots of problems as well. Everyone already lives in the bubble as much as it is, but also lots of interesting opportunities that kind of the production space becomes democratized, and that suddenly everybody is an architect and anybody can produce content. So that idea of aggregation is there, but there's an opposite to that as well, and that's broadcast. So what you give out about yourself to the world. And there are bits of that in the film as well. Maybe you saw when this girl's customizing her profile, but I think it's better expressed through another project that I did with James, who's this is a project called Cell. We did it at the end of last year, I think. It's using Connect, actually 4 Connects, to track your movement through the space and calibrate it so that we can have up to 8 users using it at the same time. But the idea is surrounding this idea of digital aura, so a kind of cloud of information that's associated with any one person. So everyone has one. If you do a Google search of me on the internet, you'll find all this information that's about me or that I've linked to myself. I said I like this thing, and all this stuff together constitutes this what we call digital aura. So the idea of self is to create a kind of virtual mirror that explodes that. So instead of seeing your physical self, you saw your virtual self. So there's all of these keywords are like mined from social media websites and dating sites where you source because people are much more careful about how they describe themselves. But we're kind of interested in the future where you might be able to access this information much more easily. It wouldn't be about going home and Googling something. It would be about being able to see that either pushed to your phone or being able to see directly through augmented reality in the air around you. And what if then you could start to see the connections and the links between you, your things you have in common. I think maybe that could have a lot of quite drastic impact in terms of how we relate to each other. And there wouldn't be such a thing as small talk anymore, maybe, because you wouldn't ask what you thought about the weather, because you knew exactly what they thought about the weather already, if they broadcast it. All of this is basically in pursuit of this idea of bringing the kind of physical and virtual together, making the kind of bridges between them. It brings us on to the final project I'm going to show you, which is called Prism. It's an installation I did this year in the V&A as part of London Design Festival, supported by Vertical Code. Prism is this gigantic light sculpture. But the idea here was to create an alternative view of London. So instead of seeing the city as made of, like bricks and mortar and steel and concrete, we're trying to reinterpret it as a city made from networks and sensors and machine-to-machine communications. So what happens here is we've got all these different panels, and each one of those panels is plugged into a live data source from somewhere in the city. So some of them are to do with environmental data like wind speed and direction, or the level of the Thames, or we've got a lot of environmental data that shows us like air pollution in different areas of the city, lots of transport information, like how many Boris bikes are being used at the moment, how many people are on the tube at the moment. And we've even got things to do with like live power consumption. It's one there, which is for number 10 Downing Street. You can see how much energy the Prime Minister is using at the moment. So everything's updated in about 5 to 10 seconds. So it's pretty live. The idea was to show like this sort of virtual London, to try and expose these sort of machine processes that are around us every day, but we don't usually see. I was quite inspired by looking at Japanese shoji screens, the kind of paper screens you get in Japanese houses. And a lot of those are quite interesting because they would arrange the garden outside and the light sources outside to cast shadows onto the paper screen. So what you're seeing is a kind of abstraction of a three-dimensional form being simplified and projected onto the paper. So whenever we deal with any visualization like that, what you're doing is you're taking a form which is very complex and you're making an interpretation of it. You're asking a specific question from that data. And the questions that you ask very much determine what kind of impression you're going to have from it. So it's not like that data is out there and it's innocent. Like as soon as we read that data, we're making assumptions and we're making our own mark on what that is. So the actual way that we experience that data is very, very important. I'm just starting out and looking into this area. For this one, I didn't want to make something which was just a sort of glowing rectangle. I wanted to do something that was out in space, that was an object we could experience in a space that we could walk through with our bodies and try and understand it. So this isn't a way to ask questions to the data. This is a kind of abstracted representation of all of these virtual networks and flows in the city. Well, the concept inside, because it was in the V&A and because it was London Design Festival, I couldn't do anything too challenging, conceptually. It had to be something that people already kind of knew. It was kind of a balance. It was sort of an art to the balance of making it accessible enough so people could get it. Which was kind of a weird thing to do, because before then I'd always been trying to go further, and especially with that the augmented reality film series and all the stuff that came with that, that gets quite deep in some areas about stuff that is probably not of interest to most people. But because this is a big thing, this is backed by a sponsor, so it has to be kind of so the concept came out very simply. I wanted to do something about cities, I wanted something about data, and it's just like, well, London is a city with all this open data that anyone can access, and it's all pretty good, so let's use that. But in terms of the physical design of it, there's a lot of prototyping back and forth, and obviously I've been trained in architecture, so it was something that I felt sort of fairly easy at, but it was, again, orchestrated build like that, especially in a listed building, 35 meters in the air, with these big kind of roads, and that was kind of difficult, but most of the organisation, that's actually the role of, in this type of project, mainly